and Magic 95.5 is Nails, host of the Kickback on Power 107.5, 1063. And, you know, here in the city of Columbus, right, Urban One Columbus is always tapped into the community, whether we're talking about local businesses and we're talking about our education system. And today is no different. Today, we have two special guests joining me here in the studio, and I'm going to introduce them shortly. But I do want to let you know we are broadcasting live on our airwaves on our sister station as well at Magic 95.5 and on our social media at Power Columbus on Instagram, at WCKX Power 107.5, 1063 on Facebook, and on our YouTube page as well. And right now, special guest is joining us. She has 25 plus years in education, and she's the 22nd superintendent of Columbus City Schools, Dr. Angela Chapman. How you doing?
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here this morning to talk about a very important conversation in our community.
Big conversation. And also joining her is Michael Wilkos, who's the VP of Community Engagement for United Way of Central Ohio. Thank you so much for joining us too.
Really happy to be here to talk about what's going on in our city.
All right. So, and like I said, we're going to open up the phones for you guys to join in on the conversation at 614-821-1075. But also, I'm going to check on the social media in the comments. So if you have any questions to ask the superintendent or Mr. Wilkos about this conversation we're about to have, please feel free to chime in. So let's open up the floodgates right now. All right. Columbus City Schools is reimagining how you guys are presenting the educational experience for students here in Central Ohio. You want to elaborate on that a little bit more, Doc?
Yes, thank you for that question and for setting the stage. This conversation is truly about thinking about centering the needs of our students and thinking about how we can do more to serve them with the resources, the programming, and the supports that our students need to be successful. And so we started this journey earlier this year in January when our board made a decision to request that the superintendent start a community facilities task force. And so we have seated a task force of community members, and our community members have been coming together, meeting 2 to 3 times a month to review data, making data-informed decisions to determine which facilities across our district they would want to recommend for closure or consolidation. But they have been doing this work centering it around the needs of the students. So they've been looking at the data and thinking about where would we stand to position our schools, our communities to be more successful if we considered a consolidation. So I'll give you a couple of examples. There are some programs in our district that are currently housed at schools that are limited in space. And so if it's a flagship program, a program that's on one of U.S. News World Report for one of the best schools in the city and the region, that's a program that we want to expand, a program that we want to offer more seats and more opportunity for students to participate in, but that means they need to be in a larger facility. And so that's an opportunity for us to be thinking about how can we expand and provide more opportunities to more students to participate in successful programs. We're also thinking about there's several schools across our district where the grade bands, we would like to do a better job of standardizing those grade bands. So we have 6th graders in elementary schools. And we know that we would love to have our 6th graders in middle schools so they can have access to the full middle school curriculum and programming. Because if our 6th graders are going to school in elementary school, they're on the elementary schedule. So they're actually losing instructional time. And then they don't have access to the band and extracurricular programming and activities. And so this is an opportunity for us, again, to be thinking about the needs of our students, how we're centering the needs of our students as we consider our space allocation and resource allocation.
And it's interesting to have this conversation because, I mean, there's a lot of people in the community. When I mentioned on the air earlier this week that we had you guys coming in, we're going to do a town hall at 11 o'clock. It's going to be commercial free. People said they had questions about this because it's a gray area where some people are just confused. They don't know what to believe. And then some people are in agreement and some people are in disagreement with the decisions that are being made. Can you explain what the task force is?
Yes, yes. So the task force, the board has a policy. The Board of Education has a policy. It's policy 7105 that really says in order for the board to consider school closure or consolidation, they will recommend to the superintendent to seat a community facilities task force. And so the task force is a group of community members that come together. They meet 2 or 3 times a month. They're reviewing the data, and then they will be making recommendations to the board based on their thorough review and community feedback about which schools should be considered for closure or consolidation. The task force has presented a preliminary set of schools for review and preview. The task force has been engaged in lots of community engagement sessions and dates like today, where we're having conversations with our community. And then by the end of June, the task force will come back to the board with a final set of recommendations. And that will include feedback from the community, further data analysis, and then they'll be making recommendations to the board. And then the board will have a very important decision in front of them where they will have to decide how to respond to the community facilities task force recommendations as to whether or not they'd like to move forward with school closure or consolidation.
So this isn't just a random, hey, we're going to shut this school down or we're going to merge these 2 schools. You guys are actually looking at data. You're actually taking everything in consideration.
Absolutely. So we have over 113 schools across our district, and our enrollment is currently at 46,000 students.
Ooh, wow.
We know that across our district, there are several buildings that are underutilized, meaning they're not at capacity or even near capacity.
Mm-hmm.
And we also have over half of our buildings are over 50 years or more of age, and they have not been modernized or renovated. And so as a district, we certainly have to be looking at how we allocate our resources. And currently as a district, we're allocating more resources to support facilities and maintenance of these buildings because they're so old, instead of spending those valuable resources on improving the quality of instruction and allocating resources to instructional programming for students. And so as a district, we're a teaching and learning organization. We certainly want to be allocating our resources, more of our resources, to support instructional programming. And so this is an opportunity for us to be thinking about how we leverage our resources in new and different ways to support our students so that they could have the programming resources and that they need to be successful in school.
And we also have right here sitting next to Dr. Chapman is Michael Wilkos, who's the VP of Community Engagement of United Way of Central Ohio. I know someone listening right now and they're hearing the conversation we're having about education and the Columbus City Schools and the Superintendent Task Force. They're wondering, what does United Way have to do with what this conversation is? Can you explain that?
I certainly can, and it's a pleasure to be here. United Way turned 100 years old last year, and we have for that century always been focused on building the networks for vulnerable children and families. Mm-hmm. We are now singularly focused on something called success by 3rd grade. It is very clear in the research. Children must learn how to read by 3rd grade because when that transition from 3rd grade to 4th grade happens, you now read to learn. If you haven't mastered reading, you're going to really struggle. Mm-hmm. So at United Way of Central Ohio, we invest all of our donor resources raised here in Franklin County, and we invest in over 100 programs at 77 nonprofits that are all wrapping services around children and families. That means mental health for parents. It means mental health for children. It's also about food insecurity, housing vulnerability. If children and their families are not stable with food, housing, those wraparound services, children will not be successful in school. So we are now funding those activities in 7 different school districts across Franklin County. So we're at the table because not only do we have a lens of how these nonprofits are working to support families, but also at United Way, we study broader community demographic and population changes because this is a very dramatic period of growth and change in our city. And we try to put those demographic and population trends into perspective so those nonprofits can be investing those dollars wisely and be getting the most success they can. And as we study those changes, we've been out with the superintendent to just talk about what's going on in the city and how those changes really align with the work that the task force is doing around looking at those community demographics.
And once again, we're here. It's Nails on Power 107.5, 106.3, host of the Kickback on Magic 95.5 and Power 107.5, 106.3. And we're having a conversation about Columbus City Schools reimagining how they deliver the educational experience to students in Columbus City Schools. And a lot of people are hearing the conversation of, man, they're shutting down schools or they're merging schools. And they have the question of why now? Can you explain?
Yes, that's a great question. So in the fall, when we had a ballot initiative on the ballot, we had talked about the needs of the district. We talked about the needs, why we were on the ballot for a operating levy and a permanent improvement levy. And as a part of those conversations in the fall, we named, even if the levy was successful, we were committed to looking at the footprint of our district and determining whether or not this was a time for us to consider school closure and consolidation. And the board, actually, we've been engaged in this conversation. I think there was a facilities task force in 2018 or 19, where the board asked, again, a group of community members to come together, and they made recommendations to the board to close schools. Well, at that time, the decision was not made to close schools at that time. And so this is a need that we've had in our district for years to really right size our district, as we know that our enrollment has changed dramatically over the years. And so we need to be thinking about how we really right size our district. Across the district, we have over 30 schools where the enrollment is under 200. And we know, when we think about the average size of a school, we know that operating a school that has fewer than 200 students, it really, really shapes the student experience, right? It's a really, really small school. It's very costly to continue to provide more resources, instructional staff support, maintain and operate the building. And so this is an opportunity for us to be thinking about, are there better ways that we could be using our resources to provide a more robust experience for the students? And so this is a time where we're having this conversation. And I want to name for our community, it is not lost on me that these are very difficult conversations to have in our community. We know that our families, our staff, our students, they love their school community. Our schools are hubs in the community. We also want to be thinking about very intentionally how, if we decide to close or consolidate a school, how we would make sure that there's a smooth transition for the students, for the families, so that they continue to have a sense of belonging in their new school.
And I'm one of those people, like, I mean, everybody knows about this on social media and on air. Like, I'm not from Columbus, and I moved up here from Florida. And when I heard about Columbus City Schools, which is the biggest school district in the entire state, right?
Yes.
And I'm hearing about consolidating the schools and merging the schools together. I immediately started thinking, from the student perspective, because I like to look at everything from everybody's perspective in any situation. As a student, I'm thinking, man, they're about to merge us with our rival school. And I'm immediately thinking student safety, because, you got rival neighborhoods and rivalries that are on the same campus now, in the same buildings. You have traditions that may die because of those rivalry games that we no longer will be able to have. Are those being taken in consideration as well? And then also, when I'm thinking about we're closing schools or merging schools, I'm also thinking about teachers losing jobs as well. Are those being kept in mind when these decisions are being made with the task force?
Absolutely. So we're thinking about the experience of all of our stakeholders. What is the experience for our students? We want to make sure one of the value propositions that we have as a part of this work is that if we're making a change to whether it's consolidation or closure, we should be offering the students more at that next site, right? And so it should be an improved facility. The conditions of the facility should be better. They should be offered more programming. And those should be the non-negotiables, because we want to make sure that the student's experience is better than it currently is. And that's the opportunity that we're providing them. But we're also thinking about the needs of the staff as well. We certainly know that the staff in most cases will follow the students, right? And so if we have 200 students at one school and we're merging them with another school, then we still need the same number of teachers and staff members because the students are just going to be transitioning to a different space. We'll also be thinking about the needs of the family. What do the parents need to know? We want to be able to make these decisions in timely manner so that if the families want to apply for the lottery and the school lottery in CCS, they'll have plenty of time to inform those decisions and make wise decisions in the best interest of their child and the best interest of their family. So we're thinking about this from a very holistic perspective. We're certainly taking the time to receive the feedback from the community, and the final recommendations that the task force presents to the board will include, again, further analysis. It will also include the summary and synthesis of the feedback from the community, which will inform the final recommendations of the task force.
And being the superintendent of schools is not an easy job. You have to make tough decisions.
Yes.
And even keep in consideration the things that are happening in this environment and in this community, because, me being a migrant here to, and I'm talking about a migrant from Florida to Columbus, Ohio, and knowing that Columbus is growing at a rapid pace. Why does it make sense to close schools when the city is growing at such a rapid pace?
Yes. So this is certainly, again, probably one of the toughest decisions that a community has to make when thinking about whether or not to close schools or consolidate. We know that we have over 10,000 seats across our district that are available. And so we are thinking about, as we close and consolidate, so that we can provide more robust experiences for our students, because right now we're spreading our resources out so thin because we have so many schools that are truly underutilized, and we are spending more resources on maintaining these much, much older buildings. And so it's truly an opportunity for us to be thinking about how we could provide more robust experiences for our students. And even when we close or consolidate, we will still have room to grow, right? Because our buildings are not going to be maxed out. And the other piece, one of the pieces that come into play here is some people think, a myth that they think is that class size is going to increase. And I want to say that is a myth. Class sizes are not going to increase. We have certainly clear guidelines from the Ohio Department of Education and clear language in all of our collective bargaining units that really speak to class size. And so no matter what happens as a part of these decisions, if schools are closed or consolidated, class sizes will not change. They will not be significantly higher. That will not be impacted. But I certainly would like to invite Michael to talk about this conversation about how the demographics in our community are shifting and what that means for enrollment projections in the city and within the boundary of Columbus City Schools.
So I'm curious, you say you're a migrant from Florida. How long have you been in Columbus?
2 years.
Okay. And when you first came to Columbus, what were some of your general observations about the city?
Well, when I actually moved into the outer skirts, I was like, man, this is empty where I'm at. It's not really the city because I'm in New Albany area, but now it's grown. It's the same area that was fields and hills. It's now apartment complexes. So that just shows you how much like Columbus itself has grown to the point where the outer skirts are even bustling, but also, since you said me coming into Columbus, I'm like, wow, this is a city. Mm-hmm. It is a city, and it's a growing city.
Let's talk about that growth. So I'll put some things into perspective. In the last decade, it was the fastest rate of growth in the city of Columbus in 70 years, and measured in a numeric way, the period between 2010 and 2020 was the largest increase in population growth ever recorded in Columbus history, where the city of Columbus added nearly 120,000 people and was one of only a handful of U.S. cities to gain 100,000 people in the last decennial census. So it is clear the region is growing. It's just growing in very different ways. So if you look at the previous decade, just 40% of the growth of the metropolitan region happened in Franklin County. After 2010, 70% of all the growth of the 10 county region happened in Franklin County as the growth of the region started to move inward. But the demographics of those households really started to shift. And I also want to remind your listeners that there are 11 different school districts within the city limits of Columbus, because we're one of the very rare places in the country where school district boundaries and municipal boundaries for local government often do not line up. Really only Whitehall, Bexley, Grandview, and Arlington, where those suburbs and their school districts have essentially the exact same boundaries. So what does that mean? If you look at Dublin, there are 50,000 people who live in the city of Dublin, but there's 80,000 people who are in the Dublin school district. The other 30,000 are Columbus residents in Dublin schools. If you look at Westerville schools, Westerville has about 38,000 people, but there's 80,000 people who live in the Westerville school district, meaning half of all the children in Westerville schools are Columbus residents, but they fall within the Westerville school district. So we have a very different map. So the city of Columbus could be growing significantly, but that doesn't mean all of the neighborhoods are growing in the same way or at the same rate, or when you start to look at it through the lens of race or through the lens of age. And I'll give a couple examples of that. Not only was this the fastest growth in 70 years, largest numeric increase ever recorded in history, all of the growth of the city of Columbus in the last 10 years was through diversity. It was the first time the white population of Columbus fell in real numbers. That is also true for Franklin County. This is a rapidly diversifying region. Just 10 years ago, just over 69% of Franklin County identified as white alone. By 2020, it was just about 60%. If the rate of demographic shift continues, by 2030, we may not have a racial majority in Franklin County as soon as 2030. So now let's go into some specific neighborhoods. We are seeing a lot of population growth in all of the neighborhoods surrounding downtown Columbus. But if we wind the clock back all the way to 1970s, if you look at all of those neighborhoods in the short north, so Italian Village, Victorian Village, Harrison West, that whole High Street spine, there was just as many school-aged children in those neighborhoods as any Columbus neighborhood in 1970.
Wow.
By 1990, almost all of those school-aged children were gone as the demographics of those neighborhoods really started to gentrify. So now we look at the Near East Side. All of those neighborhoods between downtown and Bexley, from 670 on the north to Livingston Avenue on the south. This has been the heart of the Black community of Central Ohio for a very long time. It started to racially change after 2000. It's really started to change after 2010. So the white population on the Near East Side of Columbus doubled from 17% to 35%, and the Black population on the Near East Side went from 75 to 58%. But the other thing that occurred on the Near East Side was the age distribution of who lives on the Near East Side. And when you look at a longer period over a 16-year window, the Near East Side lost 1,100 school-aged children. They lost 1,600 senior citizens, but they gained 3,000 residents all between the ages of 18 and 64. So you can go into a neighborhood like the Near East Side, you can see new houses being built, you can see apartment buildings going up, but the number of school-aged children is dropping. It is my observation in looking at all the census tract level data, looking at it over time, that what's really happening is most of the neighborhoods in about a 2 to 3 mile radius of Broad and High are really starting to lose school-aged children. And where are you seeing school-aged children growth? In places like Northland on the 161 corridor. You're seeing population growth a little further out. And part of that is also driven by the huge change with new American population. And when you look at the demographics of where new Americans tend to be living in Central Ohio, they tend to be in neighborhoods built in the 1960s and 1970s, because those neighborhoods are well situated, close to employment centers. They offer a good housing stock, but that housing stock is the most reasonably priced in the marketplace. Meaning, if you go to the suburbs, housing's very expensive. If you look at housing in those core urban neighborhoods, that housing's getting very, very expensive, and it's squeezing families out of those neighborhoods. So when you look at these broader population and demographic forces, it becomes rather difficult to be planning, because these shifts can change direction very significantly over relatively short periods of time.
It's really cool that you broke it down like that. And for everybody who's listening right now, we had to get the superintendent of Columbus City Schools in here and the United Way in here to have you guys listen and understand why the changes that are being made at Columbus City Schools, because a lot of people have called and asked questions, and we wanted you guys to be able to put it in A, B, C, D, put it in layman terms for everybody. And you can call us up 614-821-1075 if you'd like to be part of the conversation. You have some questions, we'll put you on the air so you can ask the questions. Superintendent, could you explain what you mentioned levy a couple times in your explanation? Could you tell everybody what the levy is?
Yes. So in the fall, Columbus City Schools had a levy on the ballot of issue number 11. And that levy was really the resources that we needed for our operating fund to make sure that we could maintain all of the staffing positions that we currently have across the district, including whole child supports like additional counselors, social workers, and social emotional supports for our students and staff. In addition to that, there was a permanent improvement levy that really provides the resources for our district to continue to have the resources to invest in our infrastructure. So that's fixed assets, making sure that we have a continuous improvement process and source of revenue to repair athletic fields, facilities, HVAC, and to maintain all of our fixed assets.
And we have someone on the phones that I'm going to bring in, and she has a question about the redistricting. It sounds like we have, is this Rita on the phone?
Yes, it is.
How you doing, Rita? Good morning.
Good morning.
Hey, you have a question for Superintendent?
I do. I'm curious when we're going to actually get the data on how much money is going to be saved and exactly how we're going to have the same opportunities for students that we currently have. Task force members have admitted publicly that they don't even know what data was considered. They couldn't answer whether they used any of the previous facilities master plan data, despite having been on that task force. And they stated that they've started with the premise of which buildings would cost 80% or more of the current market value to substantially renovate. Didn't even have any idea that some of their recommendations are schools that are currently over capacity, according to the district's metrics.
Thank you, Rita, for that question. For all of our listeners, I want you to know that all of the resources that the task force have been provided are available on our district website at Columbus City Schools website, and there's a separate page dedicated to the task force work. And on that webpage, there's also a data dashboard. So we wanted to be very transparent in the data that the task force is referring to, and there's a dashboard that includes the enrollment for all of our schools, the utilization for all of our schools, not just the schools that are being recommended for closure consolidation, but enrollment data, utilization data, age of the building, whether or not the building is considered a legacy building or not, which means it's over 50 years of age or more. But all of the data, all of the agendas, handouts, PowerPoint presentations, I believe the first PowerPoint presentation that we shared with the task force included recommendations from 2019 when the school district had this conversation previously. Also, it included some of the recommendations from our facility master planning process. So all of that information is readily available, not only to the task force members, but also to all of our listeners. And they can go to our district website to find that information at their fingertips.
Thank you so much for your question, Rita.
That did not answer my question. We do not actually have the information on the money that will be saved and how this is going to be helpful.
The information for the cost savings for if we consolidate a school will truly be dependent on whether or not we actually consolidate a school and which schools are consolidated. And so all of the scenarios are interdependent. And so it will truly depend on whether or not which scenario is selected. So for example, one scenario has COS moving into Columbus Downtown High School. that will certainly be one scenario, but the second scenario that it would be either or has Kaz moving into East High School. And so there are varying costs, but we know that there are significant costs we would have to factor in whether or not when that move takes place, and then what the cost savings would be. So that would be the next level of information that we will be providing if these decisions are acted upon.
You got us?
Yeah, that was a great non-answer. Yeah, I mean, task force members even openly admitted that they didn't know that some of the schools on the recommended list are over capacity. So it seems like a pretty backwards process, and I don't understand how we're expected to trust that process when all of these things, like the impact on more kids entering charter schools because their neighborhood school has closed, would impact the district.
Well, thank you so much for calling in. Matter of fact, if you want to be a part of the task force, you want to sign up. This is why I love these type of conversations, because we open up the floor for people to engage and ask questions, and you get the answers, and we get to see the passion behind it too. So we can take that passion and be active ourselves and get involved in these situations too. Let's move on to the next caller. We got Sarah on the phone who's asking a question. Sarah, are you there?
Yes.
All right. So Sarah has a question. She said the phasing of consolidation process. She has a question about the elementary side of it. Can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay.
So I do imagine that things could come to a point where some compromises might need to be made. And so my question was regarding closing and consolidations and students who have already begun their educational experience in a building that would be slated to be closed or consolidated. And I'm wondering if it would be possible to consider that those students and families be given an option to continue their educational experience through the natural grade band end of their experience in that building, while no additional students would be added to the school over the period of years, thus being able to close out the school with, 0 students no longer on the rolls.
Thank you, Sarah, for that question. What you are describing is kind of a phase in, phase out model. So if a school was selected for closure or consolidation, there's a possibility that we could, cease the enrollment for students coming in, maintain the enrollment for the students are there, and as each grade band graduates or matriculates or transitions out of the elementary school or middle school or high school, then they would be transitioning out. So it'd be a slow, gradual process where we would phase out those grade bands. Those are great, certainly a great strategy for consideration. The plan, this task force, though, will not be making recommendations on that. That was not their charge. After the task force finalizes the recommendations that they'll submit to the board in June, then next school year, the entire school year will be a planning year to determine what will be the timeline for making these changes, and then how will those changes be made. And in some cases, it may make the most sense to transition students out 1 year at a time, as you have described.
Okay, I think what I hear from a lot of the people that I have conversation with about this is we have a really hard time understanding how it is truly possible to divorce the two necessary trains of thought, and how you can say close or consolidate without having any concept of a plan. That's very challenging to wrap my head around.
You want to answer that, or Mr. Wilkos?
So I think that there's a couple of different ways of thinking about this. Again, when we go back to the charge, what the task force was charged with, that is spelled out in the board policy. They were asked to really look at the data, gather feedback from the community, and make recommendations on a set of schools for consideration for closure or consolidation. And then the next step in the process, remember, this is not a process that will happen overnight. It is a very long process. We want to take the time that it needs to really make sure that we're making the best decisions in support of our students and our families. And so the next school year, an entire calendar year, will be mapped out to really dig deeper into the recommendations from the task force. So the task force will turn the recommendations over to the board, and then the board will have to decide whether or not to accept those recommendations from the task force. Once that decision is made, then they'll turn it back over to the administration and say, now we need to implement these recommendations, and there'll be a year to plan for how that implementation will take place. And I imagine that, all of these recommendations will not take place at the same time. They will need to be mapped out over the course of a few years.
Thank you so much for that question, Sarah. And thank you to Rita for asking her question as well. And again, this is Nels from Power 107.5, 106.3, on again with Dr. Angela Chapman and Michael Wilkos, talking about the Columbus City Schools reimagining the way that they deliver an educational experience here in Columbus City. I had another question. As I said earlier in the show, I like to look at everything from everybody's perspective. When we're talking about the consolidation or as she said, the closing of schools, I'm thinking for people in the long term who are from Columbus, right? The students who are products of Columbus City Schools who want to be educators in the future, and they've attended Ohio State, or maybe class of 2024 grads from Ohio State who want to come back to Columbus City Schools to help and be a teacher in the schools. How does this make Columbus City Schools attractive to the future educators of America that want to come back and give back to their cities?
That's a great question. So I have certainly had the opportunity to speak with community members, and many of our CCS grads, they come back to their alma mater and they say, this high school, this elementary school, this middle school hasn't changed at all since I graduated. And so their question is this now the right time to be thinking about how we reimagine that student experience? Do our students, current high school students, want to really, learn in a space that looks the same way it did when I was in high school, right? 30 years ago. What does that say to the students? And I know that many of our students, they participate in extracurricular activities, and which takes them to travel to other suburban districts. And they're looking at the schools in the suburbs and they're saying, why doesn't my school look like this? My school is over 100 years old. My school was built before there was electricity. So where is the equity in that? And so this is truly a conversation for us to be having in our community. And it's not a new conversation, but it's a conversation to really look at the data. All of the schools, and I want to clarify and reiterate that all of the schools that are on the current list of recommendations are underutilized. That means that there are several seats available in that school that are not being taken advantage of. In many cases, it's under half enrolled. So there's one school on the list in particular that could serve over 1,000 students. There are 400 children at that school. And so this is an opportunity to think about, and that's a school that has been renovated. Right. So this is an opportunity to think, if we have a school here that hasn't been touched in over 50 years and renovated, it's not an innovative space. It really doesn't spark creativity and innovation just in the space alone. How could we maximize this space over here to provide more robust experiences for our students so that they could learn and teach in a space that's more modern and updated? And I know that I've heard directly from our students where they say that is something that is on the hearts and minds of them, when they're seeing other districts investing in their students and their student learning spaces. And so we need to be thinking about this. So again, I just want to name that all of the schools that are on the list are under enrolled. and they're in spaces where the buildings certainly need renovation. And so this is certainly opportunity for us to be having that conversation.
614-821-1075. If you'd like to ask some questions, we got the phone lines open right now. And I feel like we got, is it Nick on the phones?
Yeah, hi.
How you doing, Nick? You have a question?
Yeah, so Superintendent Chapman, you talked about how the district currently spends more on facilities and programming and wanting to get those two spendings in a line. Can I ask what the current or like the previous school year spending was, like what that split actually was? And then do you guys have a goal on what you feel like that spending should look like what that proportion should be?
So, Nick, thank you for that question. It's a percentage of the budget. So we partnered with an outside firm to come in and look at how we allocate our resources across the district. And what they determined is that when we look at peer districts our size, the average district that's our size in terms of enrollment with around 46,000 students, they have about 30 fewer schools. So that means that their operating costs are significantly lower than ours because they have 30 fewer buildings. In addition to that, that means that we are spending more of our resources on maintaining our buildings, particularly because we have more of our buildings, over half of our buildings, I think it's over 60 buildings that are over 50 years or more. So because of the age of our buildings, just if you have an older home, you know that it costs more to maintain an older home than it does a newer home. And so if the majority of your schools across the district are more than 50 years old, it's going to cost more to maintain those compared to districts that have, newer buildings in their portfolio. And then in addition to that, when we look at the number of buildings that we have that are underutilized, meaning they have number of students under 200, it costs us more to operate those buildings than it does, let's say a middle school with 150 students actually costs more to operate than a middle school with 500 students. And so that doesn't mean that the middle school with 500 students has more resources, because you still have to provide the same amount of resources to the middle school with 150 students. It's the per pupil expenditure that significantly increased because it's a small school. And when then you think about the student experience, then those students are missing out on more robust programming, like more course offerings. We are not offering as many foreign languages because there aren't enough students to fill the class. There's only 2 students to take that class. So it's thinking about it on a more global perspective and looking at just how we allocate our resources in general compared to similar size districts.
And thank you for your question, Nick. I was going to let you go ahead.
Yeah, just want to add some additional perspective, just going back to the housing market and these broader changes. I want to identify a couple other areas of the city. So the city is growing, but as I mentioned earlier, it's not growing in the same way, or that growth is not evenly distributed. If you look at all of the neighborhoods south of Children's Hospital, so everything south of Parsons, south of Livingston, east of Parsons, so Miller, Kelton, Whittier, that is a neighborhood right now that is under a tremendous housing pressure, and a lot of renter families with school-aged children are being displaced by homeowners, and those homeowners tend to be a single person, a 2-person buyer, but the number of children in that area of the city is really dropping quickly because that housing stock is responding to the pressures of the housing market. Another area, if you look at all of the neighborhoods from Cosi heading out to Hollywood Casino, everything along West Broad, Sullivan Avenue, that part of the city continues to lose households. It's losing people because the west side of Columbus continues to struggle. And so I think that what's hard for folks is that you don't really fully understand the scope of the population change or the age demographic shifts, because you still see the same amount of real estate. But when houses used to have 4 or 5 or 6 people in them that now have a single person, it doesn't appear as if the neighborhood is shifting from a physical sense, but that population demographic can move very, very quickly. And so I think people need to just put into perspective how these changes make it so difficult for a district like Columbus City Schools to look at those physical facilities that serve a geographic area and how quickly those things can shift for a school in a relatively short period of time.
And again, we are on Power 107.5, 106.3, and Magic 95.5 on with Dr. Angela Chapman, the superintendent of Columbus City Schools, and Michael Wilkos, who's the VP, the Vice President of Community Engagement for the United Way of Central Ohio. I had a couple questions. So one of my questions was, it's a direct question. How do closing these schools down or merging the schools, how does this directly affect Black and Brown communities in Columbus?
So first, let's think about the academic programming. We want to make sure that in all of these decisions, we are centering the needs of our students at the center of these conversations. We want to be thinking about how we are providing them more opportunity, not less, whether we're looking at the academic all course offerings that they will have, the amount of instructional time that they will have, or the age and condition of the facility that they will be learning in and that they'll have access to. So we are thinking about this in terms of increasing the opportunity for students across our district, particularly our minority students, and who are currently in buildings that are underutilized and significantly that have not been invested in terms of the facility space. So we're giving them more in terms of academic opportunity, as well as thinking about the spaces that they're learning, growing in, the playgrounds that they're playing on, the athletic fields that they're competing in. That's something that we need to be thinking about. I was in one of these legacy buildings recently, and this is a really, really old building, and there are significant concerns. And this space isn't even large enough for them to have a library. And so when I think about the equity needs, every school should have a library, right? And so in order for us to make that happen, we need to make some shifts and we need to make some changes. We can't just build a library on an extension onto the building when we have other spaces across the district where we could accommodate having a library. So we need to be able to think about the entire footprint of the district to really reimagine what's possible for our students. These are tough decisions that we are making and tough conversations that we're having with our community. But I believe that we certainly owe it to our students and families to be having this conversation right now.
And I also want to add some more historical and broader context to what I think is happening in Black and Brown communities right now. When we think about redlining, restrictive covenants, busing, urban renewal, and highway building, these, what I will call governmental policies that were deploying systemic racism, we think of those things as things that happened 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago, and they have ended. I think they're still playing out. And so if you look at specifically what's happening in the housing market right now, we have an eviction epidemic that's happening across this county. If you look at the elementary schools all across the county, regardless of the school district, those elementary schools that are struggling to get the highest number of kids to be academically on track, that tends to line up like lines on a spreadsheet with where the eviction epidemic is happening. Clearly, if parents can't be stable in their housing, kids aren't going to be stable in the classroom.
Right.
But the other specific thing is when you look at the housing appreciation rates, where everybody knows rents and home values are jumping quickly in Central Ohio, but there is a specific place where they are jumping the fastest, and that is Black and Brown communities. Why? Because Black and Brown communities have had a suppression of their ability to build wealth for decades because of these systemic systems of oppression. Now the growth of the region is moving inward. The demographics are shifting. We have a lot more households that don't have children than we are having households with children as far as the growth projections. Why? Because we have young single people who need apartments. We have seniors. That's the big growth. They don't have school-age children. But specifically, Black and Brown neighborhoods, many of them have seen appreciation rates of 100% in their housing values in just 36 months. Linden, the area described south of Children's Hospital, parts of Milo Grogan, and even into Franklinton. That's about these regional systems that are playing out. And I think things like redlining, restrictive covenants, and busing are still playing out in 2024. I don't think the historical patterns have ended. They're still playing out that story. And that's manifesting itself in whether or not you're seeing enrollment growth on Route 161 in Northland, and you're seeing enrollment drop in places like the South Side or the Near East Side.
Oh, got you. Okay, let's go to the phone lines one more time because we're wrapping up. We got about 12 more minutes left. It looks like is Tim on the phone. Tim, good morning. Hello?
Yes.
You have a question? Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, with these schools that are already closed, instead of going on the ballot asking for a levy from the taxpayers, why don't you guys just sell them?
Hello, Tim. Thank you for your call. So a couple of different scenarios of things that I would like to share with you. We do have vacant buildings currently in the district. The responsibility for thinking about whether or not we sell, do a land swap with other sister government agencies, that is the board's decision. So the first step that they would have to determine is if those properties are surplus properties. But that is not how you pay for and provide the operating funds to run a district of our size. Even if they sold a building today, we would not be able to reallocate and use those funds to support our operating funds, to pay our utility bills, to support, pay for staff and positions. So we were on the ballot in the fall for an operating levy, again, to make sure that we have the funds. And this is not just specific to Columbus City Schools, but every school district in the state of Ohio. Because of the way schools are funded, we are actually required to go to the ballot every 4 years to ask our taxpayers for operating funds. And if the ballot initiative is not successful for the operating levy, then the district is then responsible. They have to cut costs, which means cutting positions and laying off staff and really just decreasing their expenses. So that's truly how schools are funded in the state of Ohio. Every district has to go back to their community and ask for the operating funds. And then the second levy was a permanent improvement levy to ensure that our district had the resources to continue to invest in our fixed assets, our facilities throughout the building, throughout the district, making sure that we're replacing the furniture in our buildings, making sure that we can maintain the HVAC investments that we have made. And so I think there was a couple of different questions there in your question, but I just wanted to explain the difference between selling property and having operating fund or permanent improvement funds.
Did that answer your question?
I was just concerned because if you sell a building, can't you use that money to invest it into another school to improve the school itself?
Now that is actually possible. We would not be able to use the funding for operating expenses, but it is possible to sell a building and then invest those resources in another building. When we think about investing in a building, we recently renovated one of our older buildings. It cost about $20 million to renovate a building. And if we have, again, over half of our buildings are over 50 years or more, how far would $20 million go when you have over 60 buildings that have not been renovated?
I think we should just let's put some money together and let's buy one of those buildings, Tim.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your call.
All right. You have a good day.
You too.
I think the other thing to think about is some geographies carry higher market value than others, right? And there are examples where Barrett school was converted into housing, or a elementary school that was on Fifth Avenue that was sold and torn down and became a 5-story building. That doesn't mean that all the schools and all the locations are going to carry the same top dollar and a sales price because of the market conditions or the neighborhood in which they're in.
Yes, and I know that our board is very interested in certainly working with our community. And they have a board committee that will actually be focusing on this topic of bringing community members together to discuss how should we be leveraging our property within Columbus City Schools to really be responsive to the needs of our community. I know that there's certainly a need to expand early childhood education. We need more pre-K programs across the city. And so might there be an opportunity for us to leverage one of these spaces for expanding early childhood options? I certainly would love to see a space where in Columbus City Schools, we have universal early childhood for all of our 4-year-olds. And certainly we know that when we make investments earlier in our children and our students and certainly provide them with high quality early childhood programming, they are more successful in kindergarten. They're more successful in first grade and second grade. And so that's truly a way that we could be thinking about how we could partner with our community, work with our community to make to repurpose our buildings and use them in ways that we can maximize the space, maximize the land, and provide the necessary investments in our children so that they can be more successful.
And we got one more phone call. We're gonna go to we have Stephanie over here on the phone. Stephanie, good morning.
Yes, hi.
Hey, how you doing? You're on with the superintendent and Michael Wilkos, the VP of engagement for United Way of.
Hello.
How you doing?
Very well.
Go ahead and ask the question.
I wanted to know how Columbus City Schools plan to compete with the charter schools. If we're going to close down, however many numbers you guys are anticipating, neighborhood schools, people are going to want their children to continue to be in their neighborhood. So I'm anticipating that charter school enrollment will increase while Columbus City Schools decreases. For instance, KIPP Academy has a lot of students because people don't want to send their children to Midland Middle School, which is the major middle school in that whole Linden area. I don't know if there's even another middle school there. So there's a lot of people who are using KIPP because they don't want to go to Midland. So how do you anticipate addressing those kind of issues?
Thank you, Tiffany. I think one of the things that we're thinking about, and I know that charter schools, one of the ways that charter schools really capture their audience is by showing their families the fancy buildings, right? And so they show their families these pictures of beautiful learning spaces and what they can offer students if they decide to enroll, which includes, modernized spaces. And so one of the things that we're thinking about, not only are we thinking about more modern spaces for our students, but we're also thinking about the programming. And so we certainly want to be thinking about how we continue to not only maintain our enrollment, but increase our enrollment. Over the last school year, we've been able to increase our enrollment by 1,000 students. And we certainly hope to, continue to increase our enrollment. And even if we close and consolidate some schools this year, we will still have room for growth. But we'll also be saying to the families that are in these buildings that are on this list for closure and consolidation that we're offering them more. We're offering them more robust programming. We're offering them more course offerings. We're offering them with more opportunities for extracurricular opportunities and athletic offerings. And we're offering them more modernized spaces to learn and teach in.
And that's a great thing. Is there, I know we're wrapping up in a few seconds. I just wanted to know, is there a way that people who are listening can be a part of this process? Can they sit in on watching the task force meet or?
Absolutely. So certainly we'd like to encourage our community members to join us at one of our upcoming and future engagement sessions. Those are listed on our district website. And you can also tune in to our school board meetings where we'll be providing regular updates, and the task force will be making their final recommendations to the board at the end of June. So stay tuned for more information, but certainly go to our website where all of the resources. If you want the data, there's a data dashboard. If you want to look at previous presentations, if you want to review the list of schools on the consolidation, all of that information is there and readily available at your fingertips so you can have access to it. But we certainly want to welcome everyone to join us and be a part of the conversation. We welcome their feedback.
And we had so many good questions earlier today on the show this whole time. And you guys want to join the conversation, you can always reach out to the superintendent of schools. And also we have Michael Wilkos, who's the vice president of community engagement at United Way of Central Ohio. Can you tell them how to get in touch with you?
Sure. Yeah. Certainly. Google United Way of Central Ohio website, liveunitedcentralohio.org. We have all the information there about all of the nonprofits that we invest money in to make sure kids are supported, families are supported, so they can be successful in their academic journey. If we don't do a better job as a region in preparing our kiddos to be successful, that will hurt the long-term economic growth of our region, and we need to just do more to support those kids.
And really quick, for someone who just tuned in, can you tie in how United Way and the Columbus City Schools partnership, how does that make sense?
Well, it makes sense because our entire business model is singularly focused on success by third grade and making sure kids have those supports to be successful academically and long-term economically by having the supports around food, housing, mentorship, tutoring that they need in the home and the community, because we believe much of the reasons why children struggle is not about the classroom. It's not about the administration or teachers. It's about what either is or is not happening in the home or the community. And that's the space that United Way wants to wrap around those children.
I love it. I love it. Thank you guys so much for taking some time out of your Saturday morning. I know you got to go to a graduation in a little bit, right?
Yes, it's graduation season.
Yeah, shout out to the class of 2024, and shout out to you for joining us here on our Urban One radio stations at Magic 95.5 and Power 107.5, 106.3. We want to take a second to thank Michael Wilkos for joining us and the superintendent of Columbus City Schools, Dr. Chapman. Thank you so much for joining us. And we're going to get you back to the music on Magic 95.5 and here on Power 107.5, 106.3. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday. Be safe. And remember, we're all in this together. It's Power 107.5, 106.3.